Today's viewer's email came in from a guy called Danny. Thanks, Danny, for sending in your story. We really appreciate it. Now, before I get to the story, if I could ask you guys to check out my short stories channel. I'm trying to get it to the 1,000 subscribers. So, yeah, the link will be in the description. If you could check that out, I'd really appreciate it. But let's get into Danny's story. What is it with guys getting into bad situations in Thailand? I've heard all the stories, seen all the videos, but I just couldn't understand what it was all about. That is, until I became one of the statistics. It's a long story, from my fateful arrival in Thailand to my ultimate downfall, and I think it's a bit different to some of the stories we hear. Maybe because it is different to the stories we hear, that's why I didn't think properly before doing what I did. We all learn lessons in life, and this was a big lesson learned by me. And if at the very least this can help other people not to do what I did, then at least it won't all have been for nothing. Thailand, to me, always filled my mind with a sense of intrigue. Its exotic location, halfway around the world, nowhere like I grew up. Being from England, one of the negatives that we always heard about Thailand, whenever it was brought up, was that the only reason people went there was for the girls. Of course, there is so much more to Thailand than this, but that notion stuck, and it's only been the last 10 years or so where this image is not as widely thought of when thinking of the country of Thailand. I'd always been interested in the Far East and had read many books on the history of places such as Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, and Burma. And while Thailand didn't really offer me as much interest on the history front, I liked how it intertwined with the other countries in the region. How many people are telling you that they got divorced and lost everything? I should put my hand up and say that was me as well. In 2010, my then wife decided she'd had enough of me and traded me in for a wealthier provider. Not to mention taking half of everything I'd worked for my whole life. It's a story that we hear all too many times, and I wish that something could be done in the West to prevent this from happening. But things are so skewed there is very little that we're able to do to fix it. I decided right there and then that there was no point in me continuing to work in England. Half my savings and my house now belonged to my ex-wife, who was fortunate enough to have someone with even more money than me providing for her as well. So, she did rather well out of it. What a shocking human being she was, but I can't dwell on that. Continuing to work in England, I was already 52 at the time, would have been a constant drag all the way up to my hopeful retirement in the late 60s. It didn't sound like a plan to me, so I took all I had and decided to take a chance and leave England. And that's how I ended up in Thailand, travelling around the region for a bit, following the trail of everything I found interesting historically. I happened upon Thailand and immediately fell in love with the country. I think it's very accurate how Thailand is described as a paradise or hell. You either love it or you hate it, and when you love it, you really love it, more than reason itself. But when you hate it, all you want to do is leave. Thailand, to me, was the perfect location, and I decided that this is where I was going to remain. It was so easy to apply for my retirement visa, and I extended it with money in the bank. And all of a sudden, I could remain and felt like I'd made the right decision. The only negative point for me was more to do with my own personal situation. While I had a decent amount of money, I didn't really have enough to see me out, and I knew I would need to make more money at some point. It wasn't going to be a fortune that I would need to make, but I'd need to make a bit. I met so many people in Thailand who had already been living there for a number of years, and I had found the advice they gave to be very one-sided, depending on their own personal situation. The guys who had success in Thailand and who weren't scrimping and saving absolutely loved the country and everything it offered. But those guys who were just struggling to get by, maybe upset by how much things had changed according to them, they were always saying how they yearned for the good old days of Thailand. I didn't want to be one of those people who looked back and wished things were like they used to be. But after being in Thailand for a long time now, I can definitely see what these guys were talking about all those years ago. I quickly got into a routine. I rented a small unit in one of those apartment buildings that belonged to a single owner. It was only 5,000 baht per month, plus a bit more for electric and water, and it was a 2-minute walk away from the Prakanong BTS station. This was when the station was nearly the end of the line, and I preferred it that way. It was a lot easier to get a seat when travelling on the line, but someone who struggled on his legs, it became more difficult when sitting became nearly impossible. My days, when I had already settled into life in Thailand, consisted of waking up around noon, getting a bite to eat at one of the local street food stalls. Noodles, fried rice, and the famous pad kra pao were my daily staples. And then I'd head down the BTS and make my way, usually to Nana, where I go to places such as Cheap Charlie's, the Soy 8 Bar, and the only one that I think even remains to this day, Det 5. I usually read the newspaper over a few beers, and 3 or 4 hours were whiled away before the evening hit. I'd then go for a nice Western meal in the area. I was always Western in the evening, Thai in the day. Then I'd hit the bars again and enjoy spending time with the ladies. I'd been living this existence for about a year and had really been enjoying myself. My money wasn't going down that quickly, but I knew in the back of my mind that I would need to do something at some point. This was probably around 2012, and if I had to say it was the best year of my life, it most definitely was. That year, spent living in Bangkok when I first arrived, was the highlight of my existence. I often think to myself how I could replicate that, live it again, maybe find another place that would allow me to experience the feelings that I felt at that time. One of the problems nowadays is that Bangkok isn't what it was 10 to 15 years ago. It is a lot more expensive, a lot of the bars have been removed, and going out for nice meals in terms of decent Western food is a lot more expensive than it was. So, to live that existence again, I would say you would need twice as much money as you did 10 years ago, and that's being conservative. Let's go back though, and it was coming to the end of one evening, an evening that I had just left countless times, and I was walking on the street to come to Soi 7. I'd just done the cut through from Soi 11 through that hotel car park. Any of you old school guys will definitely be able to remember that. And I walked past the beer garden. Out of the corner of my eye, while I was walking past, I saw a girl who made me stop walking and turn for another look. She was looking straight at me, so I put all my other plans to bed for the evening and went into the beer garden for a few beers and to get to know her. I don't know what it was, but I seemed to click with this girl straight away. I knew what the game was, but for some reason I felt like I knew her in a way that meant I needed to get to know her even more. That's the beauty of having no plans and walking aimlessly around the streets of Bangkok. You could change your plans at the drop of a hat. So, on a whim, I told her I was going down to the beach the day after, to Koh Samet. This wasn't my plan at all, but I thought, hey, why not? And asked her if she'd like to join me. She didn't even hesitate and said, of course she would. And that was that. We left the beer garden and went to eat at the restaurant next to the New Wave pool bar. And a sad state of affairs that place has now gone and been replaced by a giant building. But I suppose that's progress. I always loved that place. It's not like the food was that good or very well priced. It was just a staple of Bangkok. It was one of the first places I saw when I went, and I felt like part of me was vanishing when that place shut down. And in a way, I think that's how Bangkok changes us. We found ourselves moving to the country at a particular moment in history and finding it perfect just as it was. I know that you've alluded to that many times, and I can see exactly what you're talking about. But when you see places like this gone, your connection to the city somehow doesn't feel the same anymore. Things that connected you and joined you to the place that you loved disappearing in a way that means you want to also disappear and go and find your new paradise elsewhere. Anyway, that week in Koh Samet was a wonderful time. Getting to know her, she was called Bo, and I found someone that was different. I knew that's a very cliche thing to say, but we had such an amazing time on the island and I didn't want it to end. She was already 33 years old and had a child back up in Nakhon Nowhere that she supported by working in the bars. Just your very, very typical story here. When we headed back to Bangkok, I felt like we were inseparable, and she quickly moved into my small studio condo. We lived there for the next 3 months, and I was trying to carry on my existence like I did before I met her, but it just wasn't the same anymore. I wanted her to be there in the evenings when I got back, but I wanted to be able to go out myself in the day and read my paper and live the way I was living before. But I understood she wanted to go out as well and be with me, so we ended up doing these things together. I didn't quite enjoy it in the same way, so my foray down to Nana area became less and less frequent. But I didn't mind it because I was getting on so well with Bo. We did get married and went up to visit her family and have the ceremony there. I went into this extremely carefully and got away without having to spend much money at all. Just a few cases of beer and some food for the village, and that was about it. I didn't have to pay anything else, so I thought I did pretty well out of it. I also met her child, which felt quite strange. I never had any children from my old marriage, and I was older than her, and the thought of her having a child felt strange. But I didn't really care, and got on with it. It was very rural where she came from, and the family had a motorcycle that I jumped on the back of and let her drive around showing me the area. I couldn't help but notice just how beautiful it was in this part of Thailand, an area that I'd never even thought of before, or even knew anything about. But the temples and the dirt tracks past lakes and every other scenic landmark in between. I fell in love with the area, and this had me going back to the times when I thought that I needed to do something to make a bit of extra money, because my money wouldn't last forever. And as I told you previously in the story, I had a huge interest with this part of the world, more specifically Hong Kong and Singapore, because I was from England. I also had a huge interest in places such as Rhodesia, and part of me wished I'd moved there when I still could, and done myself a 1,000-hectare farm in the bush. But this was me reliving my fantasy days, and the idea of having a farm in this place excited me no end. In hindsight, I suppose it was very good that I didn't move to Rhodesia. Chances are I'd have been strung up when the last vestiges of what made England great started to disappear. But again, I can't get too much into this. I spoke to Bo because I wanted to get some advice about farming in the area. One thing that was quite obvious was that the people in the area were farmers, but they seemed to look very poor. Understanding this, perhaps they just didn't have enough land to make farming a possibility, or maybe they didn't have enough money to invest in order to improve or increase the yield. I must put my hand up and say I knew absolutely nothing about farming, but I had the how hard can it be mentality, a mentality that I had all my life. I found out that most people just grew rice, and they ate the rice that they grew and sold what was little left over. They also grew things such as yams, but nothing really out of the ordinary. Anytime you saw someone growing chilies, for example, usually it was just a small patch a couple of square meters wide, but I thought, what about growing 10 rye of chilies? I was thinking big, and I thought this would be a fantastic way to make a bit of extra money while living out a very old fantasy of mine. The lack of ownership rights didn't really bother me. I knew it was part of it, but I just got along. We went back to Bangkok to think things through. The money that I had was enough to buy a decent amount of land at the time and then invest into it to get to a point where we could have a farm of my dreams. Part of me was very hesitant. I should have kept the money. Was something always stayed with me. But I decided that my life in Bangkok had changed since I got married. I wanted to live the single life part of the time and married life part of the time as well. But I found it didn't work like that. So I ended up not really enjoying Bangkok much anymore. I did the sums, and we went back up to her town and looked around for land. It didn't take long before we found a plot of land for sale. It was 12 rai in size, and the sizing did confuse me. Most places in the world use acres or hectares, but Thailand had to be different. 1 rai was 1,600 square meters, so about 0.4 acres. We liked the plot of land, but I thought it wasn't really big enough to be able to make the amount of money that I was hoping to make. And bear in mind that wasn't a lot, just an extra $1,000 a month, and I'd be happy. But upon finding out that the guys who owned the parcel next door, which was 17 rye, would agree to sell their land as well, we decided to buy it all. Of course, I had to put it in my wife's name because I couldn't own it. My dream wasn't quite playing out, but I knew this before going into things, so I didn't care. With 29 rye, I'd worked out exactly what we needed to do, what we could grow, and profits that we should make. We decided to save 1 rye of the land to build a house, which we built within a few months. It was only small, but it had decent Western creature comforts that I needed, such as a proper kitchen, air conditioning, and just a general comfortable feel to it. I divided up the land into different parcels. I was going to do 5 rye of chili, 5 rye of mangoes, 5 rye of rice, and on the land that was too low down, I was going to dig a pond for fish. And the rest of the land, we'd grow what we wanted as and when. Oh, and I invested about 7 million baht into this. This was for the land, the house, and everything we needed to get set up. I put in irrigation for the chilies and mangoes. I built a few polytunnels where I planned to grow exotic chilies, and even bought some farm equipment. We set on 2 people to help on full-time salaries and got to work. We had everything set up and in place around halfway through 2013, and by this time I still had enough money to last a reasonable amount of time, but I was hoping to just make a bit of extra money from this farm venture. I wasn't expecting a lot. I wasn't expecting to become rich. I wasn't even expecting to make more than $1,000 a month, but I most definitely wasn't expecting the things that went wrong to go wrong. The irrigation that we had put in for the chilies was stolen a few weeks after we planted, and all the chilies died. It turned out that the land wasn't suitable for mangoes where we tried to do that, and everything we planted didn't work there as well. We did dig a pool for the fish, and after a few months we made some money from the fish. The equivalent of about $82. Not quite what I was expecting. I did very well growing the exotic chilies in my polytunnels, habaneros, jalapenos, and a few other varieties, but finding anywhere to sell them was nigh on impossible, and I ended up turning them into sauces to use myself. We even bought a few animals, some cows, pigs, chickens, and ducks, but that was just one disaster after another. Nothing worked according to plan, and everything seemed more difficult than you thought it was going to be. So, a year after everything was set up, the farm had made a loss of about 200,000 baht. Not quite the 360,000 in profit I was hoping for. The sums did add up if things worked according to plan, but one thing I found in Thailand, things always went wrong. If something could go wrong, it would, and if something was going to be difficult, it was going to be even more difficult than that. On the positive side of things, I still loved living in the area, but it wasn't sustainable. The next year was particularly bad. I invested heavily in a new project and ended up losing close to 1 million baht. This was meant to be part of the investment that could recoup slowly over time, but it didn't work. Meanwhile, my wife was coming up with lots of different ideas as well, and while she seemed to have the best of intentions, none of her ideas worked. But, what could I say? My ideas weren't working either, and to blame her as well would be a bit two-faced. I'm not the kind of person that likes to give up on things, and maybe that was my downfall, because I pursued the farm for the next 8 years, losing money all the time, with the vain hope that one day it would succeed and pay me back and give me enough money to live. We bought more land close to the land we had to try to do different things. We bought tractors, we bought rice harvesters, and we did everything we thought we could to try and make a go of it. One day, though, the amount of money I had was running too low. I looked around and saw all the other farmers in the area. None of them were wealthy, none of them were making big amounts of money, and it was the guys who bought from the farmers, the middlemen, who seemed to be making most of the money. In 2020, with COVID in full swing, we decided to give up on the farm. We were going to live there still in the house, but we decided to try and rent out the land to get other people to farm it, and we managed to do this. By this time, we had 43 rye, and 1 rye is now rented out at 500 baht per year. So my entire investment generates an income of 21,500 baht a year. And that is when people decide to pay. I don't have any savings left anymore thanks to this failure, but I'm lucky that I paid into my pension in the UK and have that coming in now, thanks to my age. It's not a lot of money, but it helps me to live in Thailand. Only a basic life, but I'm happy to be here. I do still play around in my polytunnels growing things, and thanks to Thailand's new laws, I'm having a good time with that. But to try to make money from the farming business in Thailand was a disaster, and I lost so much money. But I'm happy to say that I tried. The fact that we still own the land, and I can get out of my house and look at all directions, and most of what we see is ours, that's good enough for me. The dream of making a big success of things in Thailand was my ultimate downfall. We're not in a position to go away like we used to do anymore. We used to go to the beach all the time, to neighbouring countries, and now I'm stuck on the farm. But it's a good place to be stuck and to live out my days. But I have to be careful with money now. Bad decision after bad decision took away all my savings. But in another life, things might have worked according to plan, and we could have bought even more land and built up a huge farming empire. That was a possibility after all, but unlikely. But you have to try. Unfortunately for us, things didn't work out, and life is a struggle at the moment, but we get by. I hope you have some interest in this story. I'm lucky in the sense that I still live in Thailand, and to me that counts for a lot. I yearn for the days I spent on my first year living in Thailand, and how I spent that month on year in Bangkok, where I built the routine that I miss tremendously. I mean, I really miss those days I spent in Bangkok, and on the very, very rare occasions that we can make it to the city, I can't even live those days anymore because the city doesn't reflect the city that it once was. So, at least I have it in my memories. Thailand is an amazing country, and I would say to anyone, if you want to move, go for it and enjoy yourself. Just be careful, and be more guarded than you would ever be in your own country. Things can and do work for people here, but things always go wrong as well, as they did for me, no matter how hard I tried. Enjoy yourself in Thailand, but be careful of what you're doing. Danny.